Welcome to MELfeed.video. We are commencing a live web stream service via youtube.com from Melbourne, Australia. We currently conduct these streams mainly on Wednesday evenings, with other times to be added as more opportunities arise. Please visit our website at MELfeed.video for further information. This web video project presents old and new community TV programs. Please enjoy your stay with MELfeed.video.
Well, good evening, live from Echuca. This is MELfeed.video, and unfortunately last week we had a computer crash which caused our system to go a bit haywire during the NAT Chat program last week. So this episode we're about to show you is a repeat episode of last week's, and then we'll get into some new programs straight after that. So we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you soon.
Welcome to NAT Chat, produced by Northern Access TV. Today's topic is about persecution, specifically persecution against Christians. It is a topic that is neglected, or people do not really think too much about it, but some figures are very staggering. 164,000 in 2002, and the projected figures for 2025 exceeds 200,000. With us we have Kay Harrison today. She's an artist in her own right and a professional artist, but at the same time she's got a passion about the persecuted church, and she leaves the subject. Also, Kay, you bring us a lot of experience in that matter. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
Just to start off with, can you talk to us about yourself?
Yes.
Where you coming from and grow up?
Well, I was born in Melbourne, Carlton to be more specific.
Okay.
At the Royal Women's Hospital, just
All
in
right.
case there are any people out there that were born in that same hospital.
Very local.
Yes, absolutely. And I lived in the inner suburban, sort of suburbs of Melbourne, the inner suburbs, places like Clifton Hill. I spent many years there, Fitzroy and Collingwood sort of areas. We moved further out into the western suburbs as I got older.
Okay, and how would you describe your upbringing as a young child?
Well, I'm the eldest of 5.
Okay.
And my father was my singing teacher from a very young age, so music's been a part of my life since I was born.
Okay.
He was learning at the time full-time. He was learning to be a tenor at the time by a maestro called William Boyce, who was from England, who'd come over to Australia in the 1960s and 70s.
Okay.
And he was teaching Dad, and according to my mum, I was singing La Donna Mobile at 18 months in the cot. So Dad undertook to begin training me before I had even reached school age. And so I did lots of classical scales, breathing exercises, with a view to being a soprano. But of course, I branched out as I got older.
That means music in your life was something like organically within you.
I don't remember being in the house for one day, not even for an hour, without hearing my father sing or hearing some kind of music in the background. So music played a very, very big role in my life.
And then you got professionally into music later on, and
yes, as I got older, I did. But the thing is, I didn't stay with the classical. I did love classical music, but I found that I was able to do a lot of different styles. I was really blessed to have that versatility, and I was drawn to other styles of music, and so I branched out into things like pop music and jazz, gospel, reggae, funk, rock. So I've done quite a variety of styles of music over the years.
And you got involved in 2 different groups, music groups?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I mean, over the years I've been part of all kinds of things, bands, trios, duos, working in the private sector, as well as doing the pubs and the club scene of Melbourne. In fact, I was a full-time singer at the age of 18 at a nightclub in Exhibition Street in Melbourne called the Galaxy nightclub.
Okay.
Yes, so...
That sounds interesting. We might do a program related to to that story. But tonight it's about persecution. What links you to the persecuted church and persecution subject
Well, I think if I look back at my own personal life, Paul, as a really small child, I really did cop quite a lot of harassment and bullying at school, growing up as a very small child. The relationship that I had with my father was a very difficult one as well. It was a very, very difficult relationship. And so right from an early age, I really did feel a great deal of pressure to stand up for the things that I really believed were right or true for me. And at school, I really copped quite a bit of punishment, really, from both teachers and some fellow students.
And somehow you felt rejection at the early age?
We used to have debates at school. Debates were a big thing when I was a kid. I don't know if they do them so much these days, but when I was a kid, we'd have debates on various ethical issues. And of course, I would be on a particular side, and when I was asked or questioned as to why I held that view, my belief that there was a God always came into that equation, and this set people against me instantly. And so it wasn't uncommon for me to be sitting in class, to look up and see a bunch of students that were several years older than me coming past the classroom and running their fingers across their throat, showing me that basically I'm dead. My throat's going to be cut for daring to speak up or to say the things.
Because of your views, or specifically because of your faith?
It was specifically because I was brought up as a Mormon kid. I was actually born virtually into Mormonism, and I came out of Mormonism before I was 30. And it was around that time I began to really study the religions of the world, and I began to do a lot of research, and I began to also study the historicity of Mormonism and compare it with the Bible and what Jesus had to say. And I became a Christian just on 20 years ago. So my past was seeped very, very profoundly in religion and religiosity, but I had a personal conviction. This wasn't just my Mormon faith. I had a personal conviction that there was a living God and that I was accountable to him. And so I believe my faith in God as a very young child informed a lot of the decisions and choices that I made.
And then how the connection with the persecuted church?
I actually think God uses everything in our lives. And as I look back at my life, I was thinking about this on the way over here today, that as I thought about different events that took place when I was at school, some of the terrible things that were done to me at school, simply because I stood up for a kid that was being treated in a very unfair, unjust manner, or because I befriended a kid that was the dag of the school, because I was really an outcast as well. Other kids just didn't like it. And so there was a pack mentality, and, very much like we see a lot of people talking about bullying and harassment in the schools today. But I do believe this developed an empathy and a compassion in me for people who are on the fringes, for people who are on their own, for people that are called maybe to make a really tough stand in very difficult circumstances.
That means in your experience, there is a connection to those who are persecuted anyway, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is very personal for me, I think. Yes.
And when was the time that you felt specifically drawn into the persecuted church? Because the church in Australia is not persecuted.
No. Certainly not in the ways that we see overseas. You're right about that. The mid-90s, I became a Christian. I became a follower of Jesus Christ in 1994. In 95, I was sitting in a fairly conservative middle-class Baptist church in Camberwell when an elderly gentleman representing a Christian organisation called Voice of the Martyrs came to visit. And he began to share stories of persecution. And he began to share with us, similar to your introduction here today, the numbers of men, women and children who were dying for their faith. He made it very clear that day to us that this was because they named the name of Jesus. And he gave us many, many different stories and examples. I was overwhelmed. My personal reaction to that was quite profound. In fact, I began to shake quite profusely during the service, and I got up from the service before it was even finished, and I ran out into the street because I could not contain the emotions that I was actually feeling about
that. By the sounds of it, the Voice of the Martyrs is an international organisation?
It is. It's been going since 1967. It was founded by a Romanian Jewish pastor called Richard Wurmbrand, who had spent 14 years in prison for his faith.
Okay, let's have a break and we'll continue shortly. You're watching NAT Chat. We'll be back after the break.
I love the sound of rain on the roof. But I never thought they'd hear it like this.
you can give hope where it's needed most. Please donate to the Red Shield Appeal at salvos.org.au.
I'm able to dream, I'm able to smile, I'm able to grow, and I'll go the extra mile, one day at a time. So put your hands together, we can change lives forever. Together, we're able.
Able Australia. Together, we're able.
I want to get the word out to blokes about a little gland called the prostate. It's only the size of a walnut, but it can cause a whole lot of grief. Prostate cancer deaths pretty much equal breast cancer deaths. The problem is, if you wait too long, it may be too late. It took one of my mates. Don't make me angry. Talk to your doctor about your prostate, and if necessary, get it checked. You'd be nuts to leave it to chance.
Starting next week on MELfeed.video.
Tick, 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 fashion.
Tick, 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 fun.
Tick, 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 food.
Tick, 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 festivals.
All make up 15 fabulous minutes.
In a half-hour special.
Presented to you by Jacqueline and Steve.
Every week.
From next week on MELfeed.video.
Time's up.
Welcome back to NAT Chat, and tonight we continue with the subject of persecution with Kay Harrison. Kay, continue on that moment that you went to this church in Camberwell, you mentioned before. How did this make you feel when you heard about the persecuted church?
Well, there were about 250 people there that day. I don't remember seeing anybody else have that reaction, and I thought it was odd at the time because I was only a new believer.
Okay.
But when I ran out onto the street, I found myself praying out aloud to God and saying to God, why am I responding this way? Why am I reacting this way? What do you want me to do? And what rose up in me immediately as an answer to that question was that I needed to use my abilities as a writer to make known, not only to the world, but to find a way to reach the persecuted in a meaningful way and let them know that their suffering was not in vain.
That means the empathy came very strong in you about the persecuted person, isn't it?
Very. And even now, as I think about that experience,
Yes.
it brings up a lot of emotions.
Okay. And also you mentioned that yourself being persecuted as a little child. Of course, it did bring a lot of memories on
it did, and
that.
I think coupled with that was that I spent a lot of time out of school because I was a very sick child. So I had pneumonia and pleurisy several times in my early childhood. So I was in hospital for long stints and separated from everybody, and it was a terribly lonely and frightening time.
Yes, which is pretty much the description of the persecuted person.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then what happened after that? How did you connect it? How did you find the common ground to connect with the persecuted church?
Well, I immediately got in touch with Voice of the Martyrs Australia when I heard about this organisation, and I started up prayer groups in my house. So I began to invite people to come and join me to pray for specific individuals who were in prison or were undergoing some kind of hardship because they were believers in Christ. And this is what grew for me, this compassion and empathy grew in me for them. And then I finally heard about a young man who was in prison for his faith. He was in prison under a false accusation of blasphemy, and he had been in prison for several years. He had been beaten and stabbed. He'd been shot. He had been terribly treated in this prison. He had been sentenced to death for his faith. And it was as if God had put that man's face and his name in my heart, and I began to do prayer walks on my own through a park, and every day I would pray for him and I would think of him in that cell. And it's as if he came to life for me. There was no divide. He was in Pakistan, I was in Australia. I knew nothing about Pakistan. But I just prayed and just faithfully believed that somehow my prayers would make a difference. And out of that, God put it on my heart to write him a letter, which I did. Sometime later, many years later, I found out that that man had been given a stay of execution. By some miracle, he was actually taken out of prison. He now lives in another country. And his brother became a pastor of the Christian faith. He found my letter in his brother's prison file and he wrote to me to thank me for the support that I gave to his brother. Now, I could never have known that that would happen.
Did he become a pastor in Pakistan?
He
did.
In
Pakistan?
Yes. The brother of the one who was in prison, who is now living in a foreign country now for his own protection, is now a pastor and has a ministry to Christians in the Brick Counts.
Now, apart from the letter, I can see that you have, as an artist, I can see that you have an album here called Church Under Fire.
Yes.
Where does this come from? The name of it?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. A few years ago I came home from working one afternoon and I found a Voice of the Martyrs newsletter in my letterbox. When I opened it up, it was a church building up in flames. Many churches had been razed to the ground at that time, places like China, Indonesia and so forth. And it just simply said, Church Under Fire. And as I began to sit and read the story of what had happened in that particular part of the world, it really hit me that there's kind of a double play here. That yes, it's not just a building that we are talking about. God's people who love Jesus are under fire. They're under heavy fire.
Okay.
And so that's where the title of the album came from. And I sat down at the piano and began to write the song Church Under Fire.
That means the church is not just a building you mentioned.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. When we understand the church is the body of people who love Jesus and who follow him. And I made that connection straight away, and I sat down at the piano in the little studio where I was at the time, and this song just poured out. And it's a song that you will probably play later on in the program. Yeah,
the song I would like you to talk about is the one that we're going to play is very, very descriptive of what is happening. Hidden Jesus. Can you just describe to us how this name came up?
It's a verse of scripture from the New Testament that my life is now hidden in Jesus. And it's something that people who are persecuted for their faith in Jesus Christ really understand. They know that their lives are worth nothing here on earth. And if you live in a country like Pakistan, or you're in Indonesia where it's illegal to follow Christ in some parts there, then you know that you run a very high risk of a very early death if you continue to make that stand and continue to worship. So, so what I did was I was thinking about all the people that I've known about over the years, all the different examples that are in my mind even now of men and women who'd suffered for the Lord. And I began with the sufferings of Christ himself. And so this is a 9-minute song. It's a bit of an epic, but it tells the story, starting with Jesus, all the way down to the present day of various individuals who've suffered for their faith.
Kay, thank you for your passion. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And I will invite you for another program to extend, because this topic is quite huge. Because we're talking about thousands of people.
There's a lot to pack into a few minutes, yes.
You are watching NAT Chat. Stay tuned, because after the break, we'll be back with Kay's music, Hidden in Jesus.
The thing I love about Australia is our spirit of mateship and togetherness, and whether it's a drought, a flood or a bushfire, when times are tough, Australians stick together. Well, I'll be spending Australia Day at Tamworth with 40,000 country music mates. It brings people together to celebrate our music and our great country.
Get together on Australia Day. Go to australiaday.org.au to find out how.
You're there when they can't sleep. You're there when they forget. But who's there when they're at school? Asthma can be serious. It affects 1 in 10 Australians and claims 400 lives each year. Does anyone at your school know what to do in an asthma emergency? Log on to asthmafriendlyschools.org.au and find out if your school is asthma friendly. Shouldn't every school be asthma friendly?
Every day, in many ways, the Royal Flying Doctor Service takes the finest care to Australia's furthest corners so that all Australians can enjoy the best of health. The Royal Flying Doctor Service has been taking care of Australians for over 80 years. But we still need your help to continue providing emergency rescue and essential health care to remote and rural communities. Make a donation or become a supporter and help keep the Flying Doctor flying.
Do you currently have a community service announcement on free-to-air television? If you do, you can now submit it to us as well via our website at MELfeed.video. We have lots of time to fill on these broadcasts, and we are sure to give your announcement a great run on MELfeed.video.
The fruit of my womb, my life is now hidden in Jesus, my life in Jesus, my Lord, my life is now hidden in Jesus, my Lord. Taken away by soldiers of darkness, my innocence slain. A spirit so broken, a hope so forlorn. I cannot bear children, my body so torn. All the pain and the tears, precious things I have lost, I lay all my dreams and desires at the cross. My life is now hidden in Jesus, my life in Jesus, my Lord, my life is now hidden in Jesus, my Lord. I am the brother with acid-burned hands for speaking of Jesus in faraway lands. But I'm lifting up Jesus, my preaching resumes. I cannot be silent, I cannot be quiet. The love of my Savior is running riot. Now hidden in Jesus, my life in Jesus, my Lord, my life is now hidden in Jesus, my Lord. I am the sister who lies in a grave for pointing her people to one who can save. I was somebody's mother and somebody's wife. They've killed my body, but they can't take my life. And the voice of my Savior cries up from the mud. This is my body, this is my blood. My life is now hidden in Jesus, Jesus, my Lord, my life is now hidden Jesus, my life, in Jesus, my Lord, my life is now hidden in Jesus, my Lord, in Jesus, my Lord, in Jesus, in Jesus, in Jesus, my
MELfeed video.
Welcome to the CEC Report, the weekly program of political and economic analysis by the Citizens Electoral Council. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined by CEC founder and leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Robbie.
All right, today is a very special edition of the CEC Report because we're going to discuss one subject: why Australia must go nuclear. So, Craig, while everyone's gasping, let me ask you, why should Australia go nuclear?
Well, Robbie, I think we have to dispel on this program at least a lot of the fallacies and garbage that's been brought up about nuclear power over the last 40 years. Look, nuclear power represents the future of mankind, and without it, mankind won't exist. What the issue at stake now is that, you know, we have to have forms of very high energy flux density that provide the sorts of energy levels and sorts of new technologies necessary to deal with the populations that we're going to have now and into the future.
Can you just explain energy flux density, what that means?
Well, energy flux density is the amount of energy basically per square metre, right? And if you compare the different types of energy that we have, you take, for example, wind power. It's a very diffuse form of energy, right? Which is what they build these giant windmills about. Then you have solar power, which is slightly more concentrated. But then as you go up, you've got fossil fuels. You're more, in a sense, more heat per unit area. But it's not just heat. It's more in the sense of work. And then you go up things like nuclear power and so forth. But I'll come back to that in a sec, Robbie, because I wanted to... one of the problems that we have, first of all, is a lot of people, and I've heard this a lot, say that, oh, we don't need to go nuclear because we've got that much gas and that much coal.
And in Australia, we've got that much sun.
And that much sun too. Well, that's a ridiculous argument, the last one, right?
Oh, sorry.
But the point is that it's not the issue, actually. The issue is the technology that we need to support mankind. Now, you've only got a certain number of technologies that can be enmeshed or developed with fossil fuels like gas and oil and coal. When you start to move to nuclear processes, both nuclear fission, where you're talking about splitting the atoms, as opposed to nuclear fusion, where you're talking about bringing nuclei together, fusion, you're talking about magnitudes of energy and processes that become possible that aren't possible at lower energy flux densities. Therefore, this has a great deal to do with the sort of resources that you can liberate in terms of the planet. So that's the first thing. It's not an issue of just having abundant amount of fossil fuels. It's a matter of what technologies that we can actually develop as a human race for the future of the human race. The other thing is that Australia is in a unique position in that we have the largest reserves of uranium in the world. Some 24% of the entire uranium reserves are here in Australia. We're in the box seat for actually developing a uranium development a nuclear industry. We also have one of the largest reserves of an element called thorium, which is highly underdeveloped. It's a radioactive element which can produce more energy than uranium, and it doesn't produce the byproducts that can be used in things like nuclear bombs. Now, the other country that has this thorium is India, and India, of course, is developing thorium-based nuclear reactors. It also has a fairly large reserves of thorium itself. So in the recent period where you see that Gillard has come out saying we should export uranium to India, what we said, and what we have said before, is that we should be cooperating with India and other countries to help us develop a nuclear industry so that we can move into the 21st century with a higher level of technology. And this, you know, what are we talking about in terms of this technology, in terms of energy flux density? Right, well, let's think about it graphically. If I take 1 kilogram of wood and burn it, I can produce about 1 kilowatt of electricity from 1 kilogram of wood. And if you have a look on the chart that I'm about to put up, you can see that to produce from 1 kilogram of plutonium, 5 million kilowatts of energy. So you're taking a very small amount of very dense material and new technology and creating enormous volumes of energy for that. And that's the key to the future. That is the key to being able to produce an abundance of electricity for our country.
And in a way that's obviously much more efficient than having to go and level whole forests or dig up open pit mines of coal, etc., when you can do it with that degree of efficiency.
Well, there's no accident that a lot of conservationists, former greenies you might say, have now come to the point that they believe that nuclear power is the solution for the future. If you look at the issues of deforestation, for example, in India, where poor peasants are cutting down forests in order to get firewood, you can see the denuding of the landscape is out of a necessity because there is no alternative for them to be able to find the energy needs that they need to cook or whatever with.
Now with plutonium, you're still talking about those figures you've given on energy flux density, you're still talking about fission effectively. Yeah. And if we could go to fusion, the energy flux density goes even way off the charts beyond that.
Yeah, magnitudes, right. I mean, look, I've got another chart here which goes through energy flux densities too from various sources to give people a sense. And this gets back to the issue of, you know, solar radiation versus fusion and fission. You're looking at, you know, solar, you know, biomass. That is the amount of solar energy that's coming into the biomass on the face of the planet. Is about, you know, 0.0002. That's how much energy per square metre is coming in terms of megawatts, right? Megawatts is what it's a million watts, or 1,000 kilowatts. So you've got this very diffuse energy level coming into the surface of the planet. Then you have a look at fossil fuels, where it's about 10 megawatts per square metre, right? That's your and then you move up into fission, which is nuclear and processes like, you know, the light water reactors and things we see. That's between 50 and 200 megawatts per square metre. But as you say, you start to move into this new technology of fusion, which has not really been it hasn't really been developed anywhere on the face of the planet to commercial grades yet. You're talking about a leap from, say, 200 megawatts per square metre to trillions.
And if people can picture this by thinking, when you go from solar to fusion, what you're actually doing is going closer to the sun, because solar is energy that comes from fusion anyway, just 90 million miles away in the sun. If we can replicate fusion on Earth, which is how the sun produces energy, you're obviously going to have a hell of a lot more energy from that process.
What people don't realise is that fire, that burning fire, is actually an unnatural process in the universe. The most natural processes are nuclear and fission and fusion processes. So that's a pretty amazing thought when you think about it, but it's an artificial form of energy. The most natural is...
Have you told any hippies this, that nature is nuclear?
Well, this is the brainwashing that goes on. When you actually look at the galaxy, you look at the universe, you realise that, you know, the sun is a giant, sort of like a fusion reactor. It's very misunderstood, that we don't understand very much about it. You look at nuclear processes, well, nuclear decay processes have been happening ever since the Earth was established, right? We've had the development of various elements on the Earth from the process of the transmutation of elements, the breakdown and transformation of elements.
All right, well, when we come back, what we'll discuss is nuclear waste.
If a man's home is his castle, his shed is his kingdom. It's a place men can hang out with a few mates, build a few things, even if you haven't before, and give back to the community. No man should be without a shed. The Australian Men's Shed Association is working to provide a shed for all Australian men, and they have over 400 already. Visit your local shed, build your community, and make a difference. Find a shed near you. It's time to give back.
Every time you shop, the choices you make affect our community. It is important to select Australian products made by Aussie-owned companies. Our food security means quality and peace of mind. Your purchasing power keeps your dollars multiplying in our economy, keeping jobs, profits and decisions being made right here, which is better for your children.
So the next time you buy, look for the AusBuy logo. It makes all the difference.
Every new line means 2 more hands. Join us, lions.org.au.
Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're discussing why Australia must go nuclear. So Craig, the big question, what about the waste? Isn't nuclear waste an unsolvable problem that basically makes nuclear power not worth it?
Well, the first question I got for you is what waste?
Huh?
There is no waste. But this is a mythology that's been brought up deliberately from the program to shut down accessibility to nuclear processes. And Dick Cheney was one of the key guys back in 1973 that was a leader in destroying the capacity for reprocessing and the technologies for reconfiguring the nuclear materials. If you have a look, and I've got another diagram here, for example, if you look at nuclear fuel, right? 97% of that is actually uranium-238 and 3% is uranium-235. Now, once it gets spent, once the usable uranium gets spent, you end up with basically 97% reusable materials in terms of, that's why you hear about reprocessing of nuclear fuels. And then you have other products too, high-level products that are a bit more difficult to deal with. But that's on the assumption that you're only using today's technologies.
Yep.
There has been research done at the Lawrence Livermore University and laboratory in the research facility. Well, the use of high energy laser beams, which when they hit these isotopes, the radioactive isotopes that come from these so-called waste products, can transform the half-life of these products. So there's a whole raft of technologies there that can actually so-called take this waste and transform it.
So people get told that, and it sounds awful, that nuclear waste has a half-life of 250,000 years, and so therefore we're stuck with it for the human time. And they're told that because the people who are telling them that don't want to implement the political solution to solve it.
Well, with nuclear power of both the fusion and the fission type, we have a completely new frontier of technologies that have never been solved yet. So therefore, when we talk about this whole industry, we're talking about a very infant industry. Therefore, yeah, what seems to be a problem today can be solved through the applications of science and technology.
And isn't it true in some of these cases where they have used lasers and isotopes to change the half-life of nuclear waste, they've been able to take half-lives from thousands of years and billions of years down to seconds.
That's right, and that's been proven already at the level of the desktop and not in the commercial applications so much so at the moment. But another myth, from the discussion on nuclear waste, you think there'd be mountains of the stuff, right? Like unavoidable tons of it, right? Well, actually, if you have a look at this particular chart here, you find that there's an enormous volume of radioactive materials that are already coming from material that's already mined. Something in the vicinity of 50 billion tonnes, right? On average, is radioactive material. However, on average, you might produce 1,900 tonnes of spent nuclear fuel, of which at least 97% of it can be reprocessed. I mean, this is the scaremongering that comes up.
There's about 400 nuclear reactors in the world, and they've produced 1,900 tonnes of waste.
That's right. But they have the capacity of producing energy, multiply greater, vast amounts of energy than these fossil fuel power stations.
To be a little bit political here, it wasn't an accident that Cheney did this in 1973, and his allies, ironically, were the Friends of the Earth, the green groups, because of course it was part of what happened around the oil hoax, where when the oil hoax was pulled, and there was a decision that because the US dollar had been taken off gold, they wanted to make it what they called a petrodollar, right? They needed the world to stay addicted to oil. And when countries like Germany and Japan and China, etc., decided in the face of this energy shortage to go nuclear, the green movement geared up big time to launch an almighty assault on nuclear power, including here in Australia with Friends of the Earth and the Australian Conservation Foundation. And one of their key tactics was to ban the processing of nuclear fuel, spent nuclear fuel.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because Colin Keyes is a retired physicist and an astronomer who spent 24 years at the University of Newcastle, and he wrote a series of books. One of these is Nuclear Energy Fallacies. I believe it's available on the internet, but we've got copies if people want them. And, he goes through these particular energy fallacies, and one of the classic ones is Chernobyl, of course. Yeah. Now, our Minister for Pink Bats, or former Minister for Pink Bats, Peter Garrett, who was at that time the president of the Australian Conservation Foundation, claimed that over 30,000 people had died as a result of Chernobyl. And the fact is, it's about 60 people have died as a result of the Chernobyl accident directly.
And that figure you've just said is according to the UN, the official UN report.
That's correct. Because, some people died in the course of the initial explosion, others from the results of the cleanup. But in terms of the overall effect, the intention of the mass media, and particularly pushed by Australian Conservation Foundation, founded by Prince Philip and these other oligarchs like Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, was to shut down technology, to create false propaganda, to destroy the potential for developing these sorts of industries.
Well, Craig, this year we've had a nuclear crisis that is arguably bigger than Chernobyl. We never thought we'd see that again in Fukushima following the tsunami. But isn't it true there that the rods that when the water evaporated off them and they burnt, those rods were the spent nuclear rods that the Japanese, under America's authority, have not been able to reprocess.
This is the irony of it. And look, people complain about, look at the dangers of nuclear fuel, nuclear process. Look at Fukushima example. It was hit by a huge tsunami from a Category 9 earthquake. I mean, this thing actually withstood it, and a little bit of the radiation did it escape. That radiation has a half-life. Within a few years, it will have gone by half. It will become less of a problem. But see, this is where you get into this other fraud of the linear no threshold problem with radiation, where the belief is that any radiation is bad for you, right? Any radiation whatsoever is bad for you. And so that's another mythology. In fact, without radiation, we could not exist as beings on the face of this planet. We're in an entire environment of radiation all the time. And the amount of radiation that we can withstand in terms of an increase in background radiation is really quite substantial and sometimes beneficial, which is why some people go to these health springs where there is a lot of radon gas and a lot of actual higher levels of radiation for reputed health benefits.
And when the French did their nuclear testing at Muir Atoll, and there was all these claims about radiation there, the French scientists themselves went swimming in the atoll after the testing because they showed that there was absolutely nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah.
But that linear no threshold idea is something that's been used to scare people all around the world.
Yes, and look, if you have a look at this hilarious chart that was put up by again Colin Keyes, and I like to remind people of this. If you look on this particular chart here, you get more radiation.
Sleeping with someone.
Sleeping with someone, yeah. You get more radiation from coffee, drinking 3 cups a day. You get more radiation from your TV viewing, flying in an aircraft, than you do from actual, from nuclear power stations.
So we live in a naturally radioactive environment.
Yeah, and that's a absolute necessary.
Now some people will lose sleep tonight, Craig.
There's no such thing as nuclear-free zones, Robbie.
Well, we better go down to Brunswick and tell the council.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got all their signs up. Okay, when we come back, we're going to discuss some specific nuclear technologies that can even make scenarios like Fukushima not happen.
They say you never stop thinking about your child. And it's true. Even when they've been missing for 22 years.
When you give to the Red Shield Appeal, you enable the salvos to find over 40 missing people every month. You can give hope where it's needed most. Please donate now.
Joy, well-being, community, inclusion.
Special Olympics is a global movement for people with an intellectual disability, creating a world of inclusion and community through sport, where every person is accepted and welcomed, regardless of ability. One athlete, one volunteer, one family member at a time, helping to make the world a better place. Join the inclusion revolution by supporting Special Olympics.
And choose to include.
Take it from me, one punch can be lethal. Thrown in anger like this, without warning, without any gloves, it can be deadly. One punch can end his life and ruin yours. It takes grunt to throw it, it takes guts to walk away.
Welcome back to the CEC report and our discussion on why Australia must not go nuclear. So Craig, we were saying just before the break that you've had the shock this year of the Japanese tsunami and the Fukushima nuclear crisis. How would you guard against events like that or like Chernobyl in the future?
Well, what the international community is doing right now is assessing how the Fukushima power reactor actually survived a level 9 earthquake and a tsunami. So they're now looking at how to build power stations against that sort of level of threat, which is this is a complete freak. However, it did happen, therefore they're reassessing. But there's also other changes in design that can be used, and particularly for Australia, there is a different design of nuclear reactor that we really should be producing, like on a car assembly plant, and that's what we call the modular high temperature gas cooled reactor, right? Which are basically modular reactors that are then hooked together. Multiple units of these, this is why they're modular, hooked together to be able to be placed anywhere that you want them, even on the sea, on the ocean. But
there are specific benefits to these things being both high temperature and gas cooled, right?
That's right, because there's no water in many cases. They use helium for cooling in many cases. There's one particular example like that. But the other aspect is that you have new levels of technology relating to the fuel cells. Like you have these fuel cells, and I've got an example of these fuel cells here. They look like tennis balls, round tennis balls, but they're actually cased, the actual nuclear pellets are encased in ceramics. So when you cut them open, you can actually see the outside is in a ceramic material. The interesting thing about here is that the temperature of the reactor never gets hot enough to be able to melt the ceramics. So the fuel can't leak out and go everywhere. Plus you have these things called graphite control rods that you can put in and stop. They absorb what's called the neutrons, and that stops the nuclear reaction. So what you find is if you just leave these things alone without actually modulating the reactor itself by controlling it, it actually wind down.
And there's a fancy word for that, negative void coefficient.
Or negative energy coefficient. a negative void coefficient, the same thing. They're just different measurements of the same thing.
So in other words, you can't have if the scenario of Chernobyl where when the cooling system failed and the hotter the reactor got, the faster the reaction happened. These new ones happen the opposite.
Opposite direction.
If it gets too hot, the reaction stops.
Chernobyl was a unique accident. Actually, it wasn't an accident. It was a disaster waiting to happen because the Soviet had failed to follow the guidelines for that particular power station. They had failed to do the maintenance. They had failed to do a lot of things. It was a human-based, economic-based problem. It was not a problem with the science or the physics. These are mostly buried underground, right? The majority of the reactor vessel is underground. So these modules can be just left where they are if there is a problem, but there can't be a problem with the negative energy coefficient.
Now, the Catalyst program on the ABC a few years ago did a story on China's version of this pebble bed reactor technology, and they took all the science journalists, and people could probably find it on YouTube if they looked it up. Looked up pebble bed reactor in China. They took all the science journalists there and they fired up the reactor,
away.
and then they turned off the cooling system, and everyone's getting nervous because any other reactor in the world would blow up, and it just went to sleep.
Yeah, it shuts down because it can't continue without active involvement by humans to actually keep the process running, which is exactly how you want it to have.
Now, on the high temperature aspect, one of the benefits of high temperature, these reactors being high temperature, is that you can actually get process heat off the reactor, like separate from the nuclear electricity from the reactor.
Well, you've got these gases that are transferring the energy off the reactor, which can be then harnessed directly into process heat processes. They don't necessarily have to go through turbines to create electricity and then go to create the processes.
So you could set these modular reactors up in industrial estates, for example, where small, medium-sized factories can use tap directly into that process heat.
Yeah, it would be better for Australia to have a network of small modular reactors all over the place in the local geographical areas rather than running high tension cables all over, crisscrossing all over the countryside. You can have these modular reactors, 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts. Where you've got bigger towns, you might want 200, 300, 400 megawatt power stations. But the advantage of them is that they are modular, they are contained. They in many cases, like I said, they use helium, gas to cool them, not water. Very little amounts of water necessary, and they produce direct energy where you need it. And we've proposed on our Australian Ring Road proposal of Land's Endersby that we have a network of these high temperature gas cooled modular pebble bed reactors dotted all around the country in order to facilitate the building of a national maglev train network where you use electricity to create electromagnetic fields.
And it occurred to me, Craig, that given that there's still so much institutional opposition to nuclear power, if Australia did this and we developed our country this way, we would make breakthroughs in the application of nuclear power that could then be a gift to the whole world.
Yeah, the benefits of nuclear power are only surpassed by the ignorance of the people who oppose it, right? Because, this is pure ignorance about, we're going to have nuclear power in this country sooner or later because this is the way the world has to go in order to survive for the future.
Okay, well, we've run out of time on that note, and that's a good note to end on. So that's been our discussion of why Australia must go nuclear. We have all the backup material here you can order from the CEC, so get on the phone or email us. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in for more developments.
Now it's time for a quick reminder of programs coming up tonight on MELfeed.video, so please stay with us. Hi, I'm Darren McElwain from Air FM Drive. You can tune into my show from 3 to 6 p.m. on 88.0 in Penrith and also on tunein.com. And apparently, we don't throw rocks. Air FM Drive.
Imagine not seeing the world you live in. Macular disease is Australia's leading cause of blindness. Donate now to Macular Disease Foundation Australia. Call 1800 111 709 or visit mdfoundation.com.au.
MELfeed video.
Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om Allah.
Welcome to the new season of Harmony and Diversity. Norm Curry is my name. This series we intend to explore the harmony of faith and society at all levels. And today we're speaking with Freeman Trebilcock, a Buddhist monk. Thank you very much for coming, Freeman.
Thank you, Norm.
You're a young Anglo-Saxon man. How are you a Buddhist monk? Give us a story.
It's a very funny question, isn't it? Yeah, how did I end up like this, dressed like I am? Yeah. So my mother, the story starts much before my birth. My mum was a bit of a hippie. In the 70s, she hitchhiked up from Melbourne to the Sunshine Coast for the first ever Tibetan Buddhist Lama visiting Australia in 1976. And she, I guess, was part of that first wave of Tibetan Buddhists who connected with it very early on. So when I was born, I was actually brought up in and around sort of the Buddhist community in Australia. For me, the connection was always quite strong there. I wanted to, I guess, pursue the Buddhist faith. Figure out what it meant, what it was all about, what I could learn and how it would affect my life. So for me, the choice to become a monk actually was quite a natural one for me.
So that as a child, you were exposed to this all the way through your life.
Absolutely. I think I met the Dalai Lama the first time when I was 8. So yeah, so I was from a very young age I was around those kinds of sort of great spiritual teachers in the Buddhist tradition, and we would always go to the teachings that were on, or the initiations or things like that. And I also had my own sort of inclination, wish to be there. I guess you could say that I had, from a Buddhist perspective, you'd say that I had strong karma, strong karmic connection to Buddhism.
And how did that, as a young child and as a teenager, you're not in a Buddhist society at large.
No.
So how did you find that? Did you find yourself outside of the square, or what?
It can be quite challenging in our society to be someone from a faith such as Buddhism. I think Buddhism has a pretty good brand, generally speaking.
Yes.
So I didn't cop a lot of flack directly for being a Buddhist, but I think most people my age, younger people, faith doesn't really play a big part of their life. And so to have someone who's really living it, trying to embody their spirituality as kind of a central focus of their life is quite strange for a lot of people of my generation. So for them, I guess a lot of my friends, I was a bit different than others. But for me, my Buddhist practice and understanding was kind of like a grounding. It really kept me on track, and I think more than anything else, I lent on my Buddhistness in times of crisis. So I would, when I was struggling, all teenagers go through a lot of difficulties as part of growing up.
That's right, yes.
So for me, I would, at those times, I was really, really glad to have this frame of reference, this amazing storehouse of wisdom that is the Buddhist tradition to go to, I guess, find some useful tools to deal with things.
How does that manifest itself? Like a Christian would go to the Bible and a Muslim to the Quran. Which of the Buddhist texts would you go to?
So we don't have a similar kind of text in terms of the Bible. I mean, the closest thing would be the sutras, which is the words of the Buddha. Yes. But even the sutras are over 100 volumes, so yes. It's not like there's something you can become familiar with. The main things that I would use actually are the teachings by contemporary Buddhist teachers, such as my mum's teacher, Lama Yeshe, or my teacher, Lama Zopa, and of course anything by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So they usually provide a commentary on the traditional text, which is extremely useful. So loads of commentaries in the Buddhist tradition, and commentaries on the commentaries. So. Well,
that's interesting, because you're not reliant on antiquity. It's constantly being updated.
Absolutely.
In a modern context.
That's true, and I think that's, I don't know if that's unique to Buddhism, but it's certainly one of Buddhism's strong points, is it's not really afraid of modernity, of things evolving. And the Buddha himself said, my words, you should interrogate them, investigate them, and see if they're true. If they're useful, then you adopt them. But if you don't find them relevant to your life, then kind of forget them. So that idea is built into Buddhism from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's very very freewheeling in a way, and a somewhat banal question, but. Being a vegetarian, how did that spin out? Because perhaps with your age, maybe it's not the case, but vegetarian restaurants, vegetarian food was of a very poor level early on.
In the country particularly. I grew up in a country town, so it wasn't easy. I think, but actually I grew up with a lot of kind of alternative people, I guess.
Yes.
So there was that culture around there of, healthy living and good, also most importantly, living a lifestyle that's not really damaging to other beings and the environment.
Yes.
So I think there actually was a lot of supportive people around me, which made things like that quite easy.
Yes, because your mum would have drawn them into the circle.
Yeah, it was actually, I have to say, if I didn't have a mum or a family who was so, I guess, encouraging and supportive, I think throughout time I probably would have drifted away from the Buddhist tradition. And there are a lot of young Buddhists, in a similar situation to me actually, who they grew up in a Buddhist family or with Buddhist parents, and they're not interested at all, and because their parents didn't encourage it, didn't support it, didn't think it was valuable. So for me, I think having that influence in my life has been a really key thing in actually keeping a focus and a clear understanding of what I'm doing with my life. So,
thank you, Freeman. We need to go to a break, and we'll return shortly, talking with Freeman Trebilcock.
It's always been my dream to represent Australia in the Olympics. Epilepsy affects nearly 250,000 Australians. Like me, most people have their seizures controlled with medication. Even today, people with epilepsy face incredible discrimination, but this prejudice is just another obstacle we can overcome. We're just as capable as anyone else, and often we have to be stronger. I promise I'll do my best for Australia. Will you do your best for me?
There's a difference between forgetting something once and forgetting it many times. There's a difference between forgetfulness and dementia. Talk to someone who understands. Call the National Dementia Helpline on 1800 100 500.
I was in my 40s when I was first diagnosed with bowel cancer. George, my son, was 6 years old at that time. These days, like people of his age, he's very busy, but he still needs to find the time to get to know his bowel cancer risk. Is that right, George?
Yes, Dad. Bowel cancer affects 1 in 12 Australians, young and old, and is our second biggest cancer killer. But if caught early, bowel cancer is treatable and beatable. My dad is living proof of that. So get to know your bowel cancer risk. Talk to your pharmacist or GP about screening. Protect yourself and the ones you love. Go to lovemyfamily.org.au.
If you were living on the streets, wouldn't you want more than just your best friend to keep you safe and warm? Donate to Backpack Bed for Homeless and give warm, waterproof protection and dignity tonight. Call 1300 OzHelp.
Welcome back to Harmony and Diversity. Norm Curry's my name, and we're speaking with Freeman, who is a Buddhist monk. Freeman, thank you for your time. You mentioned earlier that as a child, your Buddhist practices. What did they look like as a child? You know, 8, 9, 10. What are Buddhist practices in that context?
Sure. So growing up, I never really had a solid sort of meditation practice or anything like that. I still struggle to have a daily practice and keep that routine. To be honest, it's a discipline. But for me, the strongest parts of my Buddhist expression when I was younger was, I guess, reading and going to teachings and attending sort of empowerments or initiations or Buddhist ceremonies, basically. So they're scheduled, so every sort of fortnight a ceremony will be done, or every week, or so on and so forth. So for us, for our tradition, the community kind of provides it, and so that provides that. And so you go along when you can. In terms of the meditation side of things, the reason I think I struggled was meditation is very much left up to you, what your practice is and what it should be. There are heaps of guidelines for developing a meditation practice and things that you can do and how to, I guess, construct a good meditation for yourself. But it really depends on you and your mind and what you need. So there are many different forms of meditation in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So for me as a young person, I really liked just, calm abiding meditation, which is focusing on the breath and stilling the mind. But there are other meditations which are around developing positive qualities in the mind, such as developing compassion or a balanced state of mind and so forth. So there's plenty in terms of tools. For a young person, I guess that the question is, what do I do? Where do I go? And that's the big question I think a lot of people have is, what's right for me?
And how do you measure success?
Good question. Yeah, how do you measure success? I mean, the process in Buddhism is quite clear what you're doing. Yes. And it's very practical. It's so it's not, because it's an internally focused religion in the sense of it's about your own awakening and your own enlightenment is the real ultimate goal. I guess what you're doing is the steps along that path. There are amazing explanations. There's a particular form of teaching called Lamrim, which is literally means light on the path, which is basically it's an explanation of the path to enlightenment as the Buddhists see it. And along that they do talk about particular things you have to develop. There's the development of compassion. That's a quality that we want to develop. There's the development of renunciation or letting go, not being attached. And there's the development of wisdom, the cultivation of wisdom, which is about correctly understanding reality. And that goes to the heart of actually the Buddhist worldview, which is that the main reason for our suffering is our ignorance, our lack of knowledge of reality. So I guess if you want to measure your success as a Buddhist, you can look to how compassionate are you, how unattached are you, or on the other way, how stuck and clinging are you, and then how wise are you? What's your grip on reality? And how in tune are you, I guess, with the way things are?
And your teacher Is that your reference point?
Absolutely. Particularly in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the teacher plays a pivotal role. In fact, the guru, or the lama, as the Tibetan Buddhists call them, they are almost like, you could almost say, more important than the Buddha as the figure.
Okay.
So they're elevated to that because they are your guide, they're your reference point, and they're the ones who, I guess, help you along the path. The Buddha is the ultimate teacher, but for Tibetan Buddhists, for Vajrayanists, the Lama takes on a special quality. And I've been really fortunate in my life to have some really special teachers, special Lamas, including someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Yes.
You know, and they're not just examples, they're providing you step-by-step tools and instructions. And it's an inspiration, really, to know that it's possible.
Yes.
So.
The term guru is also it's sort of parallel to Hinduism too, isn't it? Yeah, the same sort of.
Absolutely. And look, Buddhism came out of Hinduism. It grew. I mean, Buddha was a Hindu, was a part of in that part of the world. In that. So, and a lot of Hindus might actually claim Buddha as a Hindu. I've heard that said before. But in terms of the language and also the iconography, and even some of the particularly Tibetan Buddhist practices, when you're talking about meditational techniques, they're very much borrowed from Hinduism, and the parallels are sort of totally clear. So.
Yes, as far as values are concerned, what sits behind vegetarianism? What's the principle which sits behind that?
So, I guess one of the core values of Buddhism is non-harmfulness or non-violence.
Yes.
And so that needs to be carried through in all of the things that you do in your life. So non-harmfulness doesn't mean just not actually punching someone, but it means, I mean, how are we harming in the way that we eat, in what we wear, in the way how we use energy. I think these are really relevant things for our world today, actually.
Yes.
Because people can see there's a lot of damage, there's a lot of violence actually in the Western culture. It's across all cultures, but
yes.
I think particularly people can see there's something wrong to the way that we're behaving, and something kind of violent about it. And so vegetarianism, I guess, fits into that ideal of, well, look at the violence that is being inflicted on other creatures as a result of sort of the way that we eat.
Yes.
But also there's another level which I think needs to be understood, in that in Buddhism we treat animals as, I want to be careful how I say this, not equal to humans, but I guess they have the same potential as human beings.
Yes.
They're in the same category, because really we're all what we call semchen, which in Tibetan literally means consciousness haver. So we all have minds, animals and humans, and all range of creatures with a mind, which means that we have the capacity to experience suffering. So every being that can experience suffering, I guess we have to have a certain amount of respect, because our actions towards them can inflict sort of damage, inflict that suffering.
Right.
And the other aspect is, everything with a mind, according to the Buddhist worldview, is actually a potential Buddha, is a potential awakened being. So there's a level of respect which you need to have towards the potential Buddha, which is in everybody, and the wish to see them awaken and them grow, rather than the wish to damage them and harm them. So.
Right. So that's the roots for the whole concept of compassion across all beingness.
Absolutely.
Yes.
The core of it is that beings are suffering because they have a mind, but that suffering is not necessary. And so cultivating compassion towards the suffering of all beings is, I guess, a core value in the Buddhist tradition.
Thank you, Freeman. We'll need to go to a break. We'll go to a break now, and we'll return.
Had enough of the bad news about carbon dioxide and climate change? Wood is one solution. Trees take CO2 from the air and store it in their wood. They're also renewable, unlike concrete and steel. But the wood you choose should be recycled or from certified plantations or forests. This helps protect areas of high conservation value. So next time you're building or buying something, make it wood and do your world some good.
This bank is helping to save lives. Every year, 500,000 Victorians have no idea where their next meal is coming from. Food Bank Victoria works with farmers, supermarkets and manufacturers to make sure their surplus stock ends up here, to be distributed to those in need. But all of this is not enough. Right now, this bank needs interest, your interest, to support Victorians in need. If you can help, visit foodbankvictoria.org.au.
Alleluia, Mani Pa.
You're watching Harmony and Diversity. Norm Curry's my name, and we're speaking today to Freeman Treblecock, who is a Buddhist monk. And we're exploring what it is to be a Buddhist monk, and Freeman, you've given some very insightful commentary on that. Could we explore the guru, the relationship of that guru relationship that you've had, and I've seen some of the people that you have studied in connection with, pretty impressive. How does that work? What do you do? You sit at their feet? How does it happen?
It's a good question, and I think it's a difficult one to answer because I think everyone has a slightly different relationship with their guru. For me, I met one of my root gurus, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when I was very young. He is the disciple of my mother's teacher, Lama Yeshe, who was the first Tibetan Buddhist to come to Australia. And so that connection to that lineage is there for me. I guess I met him the first time when I was very young, probably 3, but I don't remember that. But when I was a little bit older, I made a proper connection with him and actually asked him if he would ordain me, if he would give me robes. So he did a lot of sort of checking and thinking about it, and investigation, whether or not it would be beneficial for me to do or not. And then I guess he said, look, yeah, okay, I'm happy to do that. And so that, I think, was for me the first serious teacher-student relationship that I had, and he still remains my root guru, actually, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So when I need his advice, he doesn't live in Australia, so it's not so easy. So when I need his advice, I write to him, and I've had a couple of phone calls as well throughout the time. So, you write, and you get advice, and usually you need to be quite clear about what you're struggling with, because there's not much time really. So, and you also want to make sure that you are using that relationship well. There's a saying that the guru, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, you view the guru as almost like a Buddha, almost like as a divine being. But the idea behind viewing them in that way is not because they need you to worship them. And it's not about glorifying them. On some level, it's about diminishing your own ego. But the most important reason, the core reason why you do that, is actually because we know that we create our perception on a lot of levels, or at least that we're implicated in what we experience. We play a role, and so it's not like there's an external guru out there. And then there's poor me over here who knows nothing. So if you view the guru as a Buddha, you're actually creating, interdependently, you're creating that situation for a real, deep, authentic teaching to be transmitted. Because what you're actually doing is you're I guess, transforming your impure perception into a pure perception of that teacher. And then the teaching almost arises interdependently. So you couldn't say that it comes from them or if it comes from you, but actually between the coming together of a student whose mind is and motivation is in the right place, and the teacher who also has to have the knowledge and have a positive altruistic intention, and have also pacified their own mind. In that connection, that's actually where the real teaching takes place, and the real Dharma is transmitted.
That's very subtle.
Yeah.
Yes. So you would require, as you said, that both the teacher and the student need to have an intense commitment to that
Absolutely.
internal development. Yes.
Absolutely. And we use the word samaya actually to refer to that commitment, and it's like an unbreakable bond. And they say the number one reason for your own, if you're struggling, if you've got some issue you're dealing with, usually the number one reason is you've sort of had a break in samaya, and you need to check back and go, okay, where is it? What have I done? And for me, definitely, I've had moments where my samaya or my commitment to my teacher has waned a little bit.
Yes.
And it's so that then you kind of don't make any progress because you're off on your own, you're off on a tangent, you're off on your own thing, what you think's really, really important, and sometimes it's not what you should be doing. So for me, that relationship with the teacher is all about checking my own motivation and saying, okay, what's this like? Particularly when the situation is a challenging one. I have other teachers as well, and there are moments definitely where you're challenged by them. You're definitely challenged by your guru. And how do you sit with that? If it's something that's coming up in your mind, like, I can't believe he said that, or or I have my own life as well, things like that come up. I guess, how do you deal with that? And not in the sense of repressing yourself, but I guess getting in tune with your own mind and getting in tune with sort of the reality of the situation, not just your own perception, not just your own confusion.
The interfaith interaction, I should say, between, say, Christians or Muslims, they will be quoting Jesus said this or Muhammad said that. When Buddhists are together, say in your order, what's the discourse between? My guru said this, or what is it?
It does include Buddha said this and that. Definitely people quote the sutras a lot. They also quote commentaries a lot. There's more commentary than there is original text in the Tibetan Buddhist. And what they study particularly is all commentaries. But actually it's really interesting. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition is founded on a culture of debate and inquiry. And so they might, in the morning, the monks and nuns in the monastery will go to a teaching for a couple of hours and listen to the teacher, but then they'll go into the debate courtyard for 6 or 7 hours and debate what they'd heard and have dialogue and conversation and pull it apart and interrogate it. And they talk about that as being the real place where the learning happens. So that idea, I think, modern people like that because it's important, we know, to pull things apart and interrogate them and figure out if they're real or not.
Well, I'm very interested to debate further. And I'd like to invite you to come to the next session and cover this fascinating topic.
I'd be more than happy to.
Thank you very much, Freeman. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity, and we'll be seeing you next week.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu.
Here are the current weather readings for Melbourne, Geelong and Shepparton on the MELfeed.video weather wall. It also includes tomorrow's forecast and expected minimum temperatures in these areas overnight. This is the MELfeed.video weather wall. We are currently looking for a sponsor. If you're interested, please email Michael@MELfeed.video for more details.
Playing the 80s on Air FM 88.0.
Hi, this is Darren McAlane from Air FM Drive. Join me from 3 to 6 p.m. every afternoon on 88.0 in Penrith, and also you can catch me on tunein.com. That's from 3 to 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time.
Playing the 80s on Air FM 88.0.
So, you think you're ready for this?
To take on the world? Why not?
If you choose to drink then drive,
you could ruin lives.
someone else's,
Your family's.
or your own.
Choose not to instead.
The right choice could save someone's life.
Proud supporters of safety in our community.
GMCU and Southern Cross Austereo.
MELfeed.video.
This program is proudly sponsored by Overload Poetry Inc., producers of the Melbourne Overload Poetry Festival, and by Westward Poetry, the Western Suburbs' premier poetry reading.
And many of us have had the experience of marriage breakups, not necessarily as many as I've had, but a number. Algebra has 18 parts, and they're all short. And I'll just read a selection. I'll probably read most of them. Algebra, 1. I won't give the numbers. The way we shuffle pillow talk with what our exes did, and how they're at a fly-wire door, taking back the kid. The way an ex's memory dries like liquid on the skin, the way they are a souvenir you can't put in the bin. 2 exes over cappuccinos, civilised at last, see how they never touch, too tender from the past. Here now on the courthouse steps the sky becomes less mean, though each one certain they alone have had the full dry clean. 2 exes and their grown-up kids, the nature-nurture ploy, which one of them can claim the girl and which one spoiled the boy. Although all exes thin like smoke, their names may be confused. Across a table or in bed, a wrong endearment used. Normally, but not always, the in-laws fade because they seem more certain than the ex whose fault it really was. When wedding bells are wiped away, the blackboard leaves an image. 2 by x plus 1 plus 2, the algebra of marriage. Some exes drop right off the world and go to be alone, while others live by email or the lilting of a phone. It seems that exes never leave, as old friends misaddress the envelope of their goodwill. Your Y is called an X. On seeing exes, there are those you'd cross the road to greet and those for whom you wouldn't risk the traffic in the street. Do exes lose the pheromones that waft between the sexes? Some moments in a restaurant will always be an ex's. 2 exes in a coffee bar give hope for Palestine. Who pays this time? Who pays next? A kind of old lang syne. And finally the day arrives when neither can agree on who dropped whom and why, and who's the dumper or dumpee. You're probably an ex yourself. Statistics say it so. Some Year 10 sweethearts last until the fire says who's to go. Deaths are different, often less ambiguous or more. No chances of rapprochement and no shouting at the door. Virgins do not yet have exes, their time is yet to come. Exes add complexity, intensify the sum. Most equations have an X, or Y and Z as well. The goddess of the second chance still has us in her spell.
A little levity.
He recalls it was a Sunday, because on Sunday she always brought him breakfast in bed. While he read the newspaper, she'd climb back between the sheets and begin her exercises, which she called meditations, folding herself in half to show how limber she'd become. It was impressive, for neither of them were young, so he hardly minded at all when sometimes her arched back beneath the bedclothes created a little draught, or she raised a leg and caused his tea to slosh against the duvet. On this particular morning, his wife assumed the posture he considered most disruptive, in which she sat backward and cross-legged, her eyes toward the riotous peony print on the wall behind their bed, her shoulders draped in more than her half of the covers. He tugged at the shared sheet with one hand, holding a slice of lightly buttered multigrain in the other. A request was forming on his lips. Could she find somewhere less connubial to meditate? He got as far as opening his mouth when suddenly the mauve Egyptian cotton slipped from her arms like something alive, and his wife lifted off the bed to drift slowly toward the ceiling, with her feet on her thighs, a perfect lotus, if he wasn't mistaken. Of late she had dispensed with nightgowns. Now, while she hovered dignified as the Sunday roast above his head, he thought how from this vantage point she looked delicious, so pink and round. He decided not to interrupt her. Instead, he opened his Sunday paper to the lifestyle section, an article on the suburbs, and he smiled because, all things considered, his wife was really quite remarkable.
I'd like to read a poem about this room. On an occasion when I visited here 3 years ago, and I was actually behaving badly. I'd come down here actually to see Jenny in an exhibition she had here, but I was going on to visit Elizabeth McAlpine, who was the illustrator of my books of poetry for many years, and Elizabeth had terminal breast cancer, and I was really upset about this. And I had an act of madness in this room. I was walking through this room and I came across that statue over there. It was called Katie, I thought then, or Christine, and I kissed the statue. That was fine. I went outside, and then there was no one in the room, so I came back and I kissed the statue passionately, quite mad. And this is my poem. It's called Angel at Montsalvat. Hypotenuse, a wood on stone, a Gothic folly on a hill to European dreams of angels, holy grail and trolls and magic flute. An artist's colony with chapel, forge and gallery, a copse of pines, a fairy tree and daisies in the grass. Left Katia at perfect pitch, with open mouth upon a plinth, pert breasts displayed. Elizabeth, who graced my verse, a tumour burning near her heart. And at 70 I cupped cold bronze and pecked those lips, and dizzy at the faint prospect that she was my Pygmalion, went back inside to give her breath. Tongue past the statue for os lit and for Elizabeth, sucked in the madness and the genius of place, and kissed her in the name of art and death, sucked in her air and felt the nether region stir.
And I was also going to say to Jeff that there's only one thing worse than reading in front of your own portrait. That's reading in front of somebody else's portrait. Feel a hand tapping on the shoulder. I'm going to... Edwin read a poem about Ireland, so I'm going to read a poem about Australia. Well, not exactly about Australia, but a poem that occurred to me as I arrived in Australia. And I arrived here and went immediately to the Blue Mountains, to Varuna, the Writers' Centre there. and as you probably know, writer centres are like cheap hotels. They always have little stickers on things, little pieces of advice. You know, don't put things down the toilet and put the milk back in the fridge and things like that. And I'm quite used to this, but I was completely thrown by one sticker on the fridge, which read, "Dear writers, bananas are too expensive. Sorry." Well, I've just come from Ireland, so I was completely puzzled by this, and you can't really ask anybody because you just look stupid. So here is the poem called "On the Fridge at Verona." Dear writers, bananas are too expensive. Sorry. Dear bananas, writers are too expensive. Sorry. Dear expensive bananas, writers are too sorry. Dear expensive writers, bananas are too sorry. Dear expensive bananas, are writers sorry too? Dear sorry writers, are bananas expensive too? Writers are bananas, expensive too. Sorry, dear. Expensive bananas, writers are too sorry, dear. Sorry, dear, expensive writers are too bananas. Sorry, writers, expensive bananas are dear too. And lastly, bananas are sorry, writers, dear, too expensive.
Australian women need to kiss more. Watch out for persistent and unusual symptoms, as they could be a sign of ovarian cancer. Know the important signs and symptoms. Kiss. Look out for symptoms like abdominal or back pain, difficulty eating or feeling full quickly, or persistent bloating, or a change in toilet habits. If you're experiencing persistent and unusual symptoms for more than 14 days, see a GP. Make sure you kiss regularly.
Would your life be different if you chose to swim between the flags instead of that unpatrolled beach? If you'd checked the depth before you dived into shallow water? If you didn't swim under the influence of alcohol and chose not to swim at night? If you only listened to the lifesavers warnings?
Make the right choice this summer. Enjoy our beautiful beaches. Always swim between the red and yellow flags.
If we can't see you, we can't save you.
I love the sound of rain on the roof, but I never thought they'd hear it like this.
You can give hope where it's needed most. Please donate to the Red Shield Appeal at salvos.org.au.
If you choose to drive when overtired,
You could ruin lives.
someone else's, your family's, or your own,
Choose a power nap instead.
the right choice could save someone's life.
Proud supporters of safety in our community.
GMCU and Southern Cross Austereo.
To my partner Alison, melons. Lost in a field of friendly melons, tossed in a vat of thickened cream, licked by 1,000 fervent puppies, that was the substance of my dream. Did it really howl and happen somewhere in this moonlit bed? So many circles of confusion whirling in my hapless head. Did I dream or was I there? What acres were we really in? As now, next morning, writing this, I smell the melons on my skin.
This is for people who aren't exactly sure what they're afraid of. It's called The Things We Love. In the middle of Survivor, Sylvia gets up and heads for the phone, doesn't even wait for the ad. There's a lot of rings before somebody answers. There's laughing in the background, music, and the kids are yelling. She's an interruption. It's not like she's got anything to say, but she asks for every one of them because their voices are all she has for certain. Brian pulls away from the curb. He'll be home for dinner, but he keeps his gaze in the rearview mirror until she's just a tiny doll in the driveway. It's dangerous going forward and looking back, but that diminishing sliver has to last him all day. Jane and Tony stir from worrying dreams, awake in the dark. They ask themselves if maybe they should move across town, be closer in case they're needed. They had always planned to travel. Now freedom seems the stupidest thing in the world. You walk a block, then stop, and the soles of your shoes start rocking on the pavement, and you turn around. You find her still in the kitchen with the teapot in her hand, surprised by your return and your shamefaced kisses. How can we explain? We have to do it, and we have to stop doing it, because, like they say, life goes on. It does. But this is all we have for certain.
This is a Baudelaire imitation called Cats. Sages austere and fervent lovers both in their ripe season cherish cats, the pride of hearths, strong, mild and self-allied in chilly stealth and sedentary sloth. Friends both to lust and learning, they frequent the silences, the horror darkness breeds. Erebus would have chosen them for steeds or hearses, could their pride be bent. Flaunting the noble postures they assume, great sphinxes long for endless solitude, benumbed by dreams as porous as the sand, while fertile flanks both quiver and command, and flecks of gold, astringent in slow eyes, bestar their pupils with a mock surprise.
Ireland, by some strange fate, quirk of fate, has become a very wealthy country in the last 10 years, and so we're really not quite coming to terms with that yet, and so people need all sorts of advice on how to get through this terrible tragedy. In particular, our young people who, of course, need to form relationships, but their whole language has been corrupted in some sense. So this poem is called City Love. Six pieces of advice. 1. You look into your true love's eye to see what terms and conditions apply. 2. Although your offer of love is rejected, your statutory rights are not affected. 3. The sweetest love's in anticipating. The customer knows a call is waiting. Your call, more lovely than that of the linnet, is charged at 58 cents per minute. 5. Counting the cost of true love's obsession. Failure to meet payments can mean repossession. And 6. How many I love you departures before you learn past performance is no guarantee of future return. Thank you.
Another poem that Nigel Roberts said in Sydney, I'd saved all the poets this age from writing. He'd been thinking of writing the same poem. The Open Field. Now, on the other side of 60, you're like an open field. Soon the disabilities will start to sprinkle down those fancy Greek and Latin tags. The same low isobars will bring the illnesses as well, that list of diminutions. The bloodstream, once a freeway, is now a cul-de-sac. The heart taps out its hapless morse. A great metropolis of nerves is slowly frozen over, and cancers sotto voce make their covenants of pain. When clouds like these hang overhead, you know you're just an open field waiting for the rain.
Now this one is new. I read it to a friend who said, people will be shocked, you're so nice. So I knew it was about time I read this. Where you went wrong. I will stand outside the house of your dreadful chemistry, shouting curses while your neighbours gather. I will come with paint and spit your crimes in red across your smug walls. I will hire a helicopter from which to drop pamphlets describing your wickedness, and my 1,000 backward doves will dive holes into whatever peace you have. I will bring fire to fight yours with, and you will find smoking destruction where you least expect it, as I have done. Oh, and I will follow you with your pretty family. I will loiter by the schoolyard of your children with little gifts they can't refuse, because nobody's innocent here. Am I right? Am I right? You will wonder where you went wrong. You will wonder for months, while I come with guns and bombs, hammers and razors and ropes, and finally with acid for the wiping off of satisfied smiles. I will carry a bright, beautiful knife for signing my name, and a camera for the moment you understand perfectly about consequences.
Hush, little baby, don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby. When you're sleeping safe and sound, you've got the proudest dad in town. I remember when I first saw you, your heart beating as you grew. We'll read you stories to help you dream. Your mommy and I are a perfect team. I can't wait to hear you sing or watch as you put on a wedding ring. One day you'll have children too. Remember the times I sang to you.
Come on, fellas. Let's get down there.
Hang on. Where's Dave?
Oh, hey, fellas. What do you think? Pretty cool, eh?
Real men look out for each other. Don't let your mates drink and drown.
We reckon one of the most powerful things in the world is this sausage, because a sausage can do just about anything. It helps people to walk, see and hear, supports families after fire, drought and flood, and even helps plant trees in our community. Our sausages are working to cure cancer, helping farmers in tough times, and connecting people who are new to a community. And at the same time that they're doing all that, they're nurturing the leaders of tomorrow while building friendships that last a lifetime. Yep, these humble sausages are more powerful than you can believe. They're working wonders in our community. And at Lions, so can you. Lions Australia, we serve more than sausages.
In this book there's a sequence of 5 poems called The Pleasures of Apartment Life, and I'll just read you number 4 of these, one of the regulations in the apartment block that I live in. And pets, of course, are not required. Our lives are free of dogs. We simply will not tolerate their tiresome monologues. Cats are technically allowed. There are just 1 or 2 who sit like vases in the window and wonder what to do. There may be goldfish in a tank or no budgies yet been heard, while ferrets or a hamster are intrinsically absurd. We humans here are self-sustained. We need no welcome home from slobby dog or slinky cat. We want no fur to comb. We have no wish for kitty litter nor Pekingese excreta. Pets interrupt the flow of life and meddle with its meter. We have no wish to trot the dog or dumbly pat the cat. We love ourselves in 1s and 2s and are content with that.
One poem here that I wrote 20-odd years ago, but it's still topical after the recent war in Lebanon. So I thought I'd drag it out again. It's called Song of Lebanon. Out of the rubble of Sidon and Tyre, whose beams are of cedar, the rafters of pine, The road to Damascus is littered with briar, and snipers still fire across the green line, dividing the enclaves of mountain and spire, where blood of the martyrs is flowing like wine, that cakes in the grove and the barley and rye, and withers the rose as the fruit on the vine. The iron fist of David in chariots of fire withdraws from the rubble of Sidon and Tyre. The daughters of Zion plant aloes and myrrh, and put to the sickle the thistle and burr. The alien weed smell of Lebanon still, the cross, star and crescent, a licence to kill.
The Sparrows at Brunetti's. And if you're living in Melbourne, there's no excuse for not having been to Brunetti's in Carlton. But there are other places equally good, maybe some places better. I'm not an authority on that. The Sparrows at Brunetti's define the word alert, perching on vacated chairs, pesky, preened and pert. The remnants they have cornered have fine Italian names. Before a blonde in black can swoop, they've measured out their claims. Among spent cappuccinos and empty latte glasses, the sparrows feel for real estate defeats the middle classes. Each bird has long developed a rich, pragmatic taste. They recognise a crema, and as nothing goes to waste. As perky cognoscenti, they've found their final niche on Faraday with students and a slice of nouveau riche. The treble of their flutter makes the day complete. Edgy as the traffic, they're the caffeine in the street.
Basically, this is about a little moment on a Saturday morning between the humiliations of the working week and the even greater humiliations of the family weekend, when a man might think he was king of something. The king of suburbia. Like any Wenceslas, I must look out beyond the castle gate to know my realm, with neither page nor courtier about, to see me gingerly let go the helm. Each early morning Saturday I rise and leave aside the sceptre and the crown. Unshaven and unshowered I disguise the stamp and coin of profile, dressing down in faded denim of the lower rank. Long ere the royal princes will awake, I place a box of empties in the boot, and setting forth toward the bottle bank, seat-belted earl of Park and Close, I take a 21 black wheelie bin salute.
Yeah. The cello sonatas of J.S. Bach are made of passages and stairways, halls that do not have an ending, stairs with landings halfway up to show the sudden stars. The architect loves repetition with secret variations you don't quite see at first. Doorways in a long perspective that actually grow smaller. Windows in a night facade with slightly different sills. They have an amplitude as well to match the cello's belly. Curlicues and subtle serifs echoing the scroll. The scratchy record by Casals, inscribed on Bakelite, is still so far the best of Bach. Play it late, say 3 a.m, like some wild, forgotten child. You'll run all night, the empty stairwells flowering in the dark.
This program was proudly supported by our sponsors.
MELfeed.video.
Hi, I'm John Cannard. Today Transit travels to the Tramways Museum Society of Victoria, to their museum at Bylands, which is just outside Kilmore. I have with me Mr. Rod Atkins, Chairman of the group. Good afternoon, Rod.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the museum.
Thanks, Rod. Rod, could you tell me a little bit about your plans and things that you have for the museum, please?
Well, since we've been here since 1971, we've been building several sheds. We've got about 4 now, which we've been filling up with electric trams, cable trams, and some motor buses from the Tramways board. And as well as that, we've been constructing a line towards Kilmore, and at this stage we've made about 3/4 of a mile of electric tram track.
Right, Rod. And Rod, could you tell me something about the tram we're travelling in at the moment?
Yes, this is a W1 class tram that came out in 1927. These trams are all open on the sides with these longitudinal seats in the centre section, and we're all open like behind us here.
Looking straight out ahead of us, you have a great view. What is the view?
Oh, this magnificent view that we're proud of is the view across to King Lake. The main Hume Highway runs down in the valley down the bottom of the hill here, and then we look right up over to the other side.
After our ride on tram 427, we're now back at the depot area. On the way back, you were mentioning to me about your latest project and the shed you had in mind.
Yes, this is our new vehicle maintenance shed that we're building at the moment. We've just had a new concrete pit installed just before Christmas, which we'll weld the rails to the top of very shortly, and we're in the process of installing a building over the top of it at the moment.
And how long will this take you to complete this project?
We're hoping to have this finished, the main structure of the building finished within the next 3 months, and then at the same time also install the track into the shed.
Right. And what is the pit going to be used for?
Basically it's going to be used for the servicing of the trams underneath and adjusting of the brakes of the trams, which is very hard to do if you can't get underneath the trams.
We're now back in the depot. This is number 2 shed. Gosh, you people really believe in self-help. I can see now you're even repairing your own trams.
Yes, this is W3 number 667. We're currently doing minor repairs and a total repaint of this tram, which will put it back to a 1930s green and cream livery as they were when the colour scheme was originally launched. This will include gold striped lining with gold numbering and monograms on the saloon sides.
Rod, you were telling me that the livery of this tram now we're looking at was quite different to the present day livery.
Yes, as you can see from the tram to the left of this one, which is in the Metropolitan Transit colour schemes, you can see how the green in fact has changed with the coming of the gold and green livery.
As we stand at the door of the shed and look in towards the shed, one of the things that you can't help but notice is the timber troughing. You told me there's quite a story behind this.
Yes, this timber troughing directly above us here is out of the former Victorian Railways Elwood tram depot, which was demolished late last year. The Society had the opportunity to go into that depot just before it was pulled down and remove all this troughing so that it could be not only displayed here in this shed but actually used as troughing again.
Rod, you were telling me it's a great age of this Oregon timber.
Yes, we believe this timber goes back to when the shed was originally built around 1907.
The motto in that is Build Your House of Oregon. Now here is a little beauty. Could you tell me something please about Royal Park 256?
Yes, this is in fact a standard 8-window four-wheel cable car trailer, of which there were over 500 built for the Melbourne cable tram system. But several of them were in fact used for horse tram application, including one that went onto the Royal Park horse tram that ran from the corner of Gatehouse Street and Sydney Road through to the front entrance of the Zoological Gardens.
As we've walked around the depot, I've been very impressed by the cleanliness of your rolling stock. I now look ahead there and I see how your rolling stock is kept so clean. You must rely very heavily on volunteers, Rod.
Yes, we do actually. Without the volunteers, well, we wouldn't achieve even 80% of what we've been able to achieve here. These two ladies enjoy cleaning the buses and the trams. They give it a number of hours, and this bus is being prepared for an outing in the next couple of days.
Rod, many thanks for a very enjoyable afternoon at Bylands Tram Museum. I've really enjoyed today, and if any of our viewers wish to have a great day's outing like I've had, what do they do?
Well, it's all very simple actually. We're open every Sunday here from 10 till 5 and on some public holidays, and we always look forward to having people through to view all our exhibits and trams.
Rob, could you just tell them how to get here, what road to travel?
Well, if you turn off the Northern Highway at the Wallen exit off the main Hume Highway, once you come up the top of Pretty Sally Hill, about a mile past that, there's big brown signs telling you to turn off down Union Lane to the right.
Thank you, Rob.
MELfeed.video.
I didn't think this could happen in Toowoomba. And then I saw it on TV that night. It really opened my eyes.
Whenever the community comes to us and says we need your help, we do whatever we can to assist.
It is a great feeling to be able to help your neighbours, to be able to help your community.
Each Lions member and each Lions club in different parts of the country, we're totally different. But we have core values that are the same. They remain the same for any Lions member and any Lions club anywhere in not just Australia but around the world.
Anything that you can think of that you want to do and support and help, Lions are doing it right now somewhere in this world.
I think Lions need to tell their story. They need to let people know the amazing things that they do.
The three major streams that we have in Lions are the community service that we do for the public, health and medical research, and the disaster relief.
We're out there to help people. If you love helping people, get out and help. Join a Lions Club.
We started this project about 20 years ago. All this gear would normally go to the tip. We recycle it and give it to someone less fortunate and where it is needed in the world.
Being a Lion
here in Australia means that I can make a difference to my community. But most importantly, it's inspiring other people to get out and be part of their community and make it a safer and a much happier and better place to live.
Childhood cancer, I've always been interested in cancer and small children from the time I first got cancer 30 years ago. Research is an indefinite item. You can't see it, but it helps so much.
I'm here managing the money and the relationships, but other people are out there raising funds and bringing in community support. Without all of us working together, we can't affect change.
2 more extra hands at any function, any working bee, anything we do, 2 more hands can help us raise more funds, can help us serve our community better.
I went to my Lions Club and I said, I got this idea and I think it's a little bit crazy, but I think we could raise some serious money doing it. And it was to run 100 kilometres. And the club said, okay, if you want to do this, whatever you need us to do, we'll be there 100%. And I'm pretty proud to say that together we raised just over $16,000. So we blew the target out of the water, and I think that was due to a lot of the support that I got.
Through my leadership training and all that, I've learned about thinking global and acting local, and Lions Club is definitely that kind of thing. They act within their communities, but the money that they raise can often end up in any corner of the world.
As an individual, I could only do so much, and whilst it was my burning desire to try and help these people, having an organisation such as the Lions family to call upon to support me and those people that were working with me just made it possible for us to achieve so much more.
You know, after the devastation, to come back into the community, you know, you were shattered by what you saw. You know, no police station, no post office, no petrol station, you know, no kindergarten. There was nothing here.
And all that water with an unstoppable...
I don't know that I've ever seen as much as arrived. There were fridges, washing machines, dryers. There was toasters, jugs, just everything.
To be invited to be a part of Lions just opened up a whole new world to me. A world that provided a structured organisation that could see that the hours that I volunteered could achieve so much more.
I think Lions is a wonderful organisation. The people in it have charity in their hearts.
I can go anywhere in this country, see somebody with a Lions badge, walk up to them and say, good day. You got a friend.
Never once in my life had I had a group of people where I could go to, say anything, and know that no matter what, they would be there, they would stand by me.
It's the family. That's what we call it. It's the Lions family. Without Lions, I think I'd be lost now, because they've been my life.
We work hard, but the most important thing is we have fun.
The fellowship of all the members of the club, the broader community, it's just a tremendous organisation to belong to. You know, I'll be here till I die.
It is extremely rewarding and gratifying to be a part of an organisation that can spread its support so far and wide.
More members means more hands, means more support to the community.
I would encourage everyone just to give it a go and see if it is for them, because the return that you get for giving to others is amazing.
Get out there, do something wonderful, be part of this fantastic organisation.
MELfeed.video.
news. Imagine not seeing the world you live in. Macular disease is Australia's leading cause of blindness. Donate now to Macular Disease Foundation Australia. Call 1800 111 709 or visit mdfoundation.com.au.
MELfeed.video.
Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 18th of May. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, tax won't fix the economy. We need a new financial structure. And who is really interfering in our democracy? Before we begin, Craig, let me just emphasise again for our viewers, we need you to continue to work with us on our campaign for Glass-Steagall. So, like last time, if you haven't signed our petition on change.org, please do. Every time someone signs it, emails are sent to members of Parliament. What we're in is a position, Craig, where the Royal Commission will start again next week. Banking will again become the subject. But there's signs. We'll be discussing this in the show in the last episode and previous episodes. There is signs that people are talking about the need for banking separation, but the banks are trying to say, oh yeah, but you don't need to go that far. Let's try and do other things first, right? Yeah. And it's all a ploy. It's all a scam, and the public has to demand something that's going to lock the predators out of the real economy. And we'll talk about that more in a minute as well.
Yeah, well, I think, Robbie, we'll talk more about Glass-Steagall as we go along for our new viewers so people don't get lost.
Exactly. And so that's the first item. Tax won't fix the economy. We need a new financial structure. The big issue, Craig, is, and we'll get to Glass-Steagall via this avenue, right, because we want to come at it from a slightly different angle. Everyone knows that in Australia at the moment, we've just had the budget handed down and the opposition has announced their budget proposal, and the issue is tax. They're competing with each other on tax, right? Our tax cuts are better than your tax cuts, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. What it shows, actually, is the continued neoliberal hold over Australian politics, because there's a global rejection of neoliberalism sweeping the world, but in Australia, the top of the major parties, including the Labor Party is making some concessions because some of them are starting to see there's the shifting sands, but their relationship with the vested interests at the top of both parties is so tight, they're not actually saying let's have a structural reform of the economy. It's all about let's compete on stuff like tax cuts, right? Yeah. And that's a neoliberal worldview, right? Both of that.
This neoliberalism, for the new viewers, Robbie, is the policy of small government. Everything has to be run by private enterprise, that the banks have a free rein, support for free trade, for globalisation, which in turn means shutting down local domestic manufacturers based upon the fact that we can't compete under trade terms that are governed by the financial system.
Privatisation.
It's privatisation, all this economic rationalism, what you've seen with the electricity, privatisation and so forth, that's all economic rationalism. And Robbie, the point I want to make is it's all new. And this is not something that is sort of been around for 200 years. I mean, free trade and globalisation and the British free model of free trade has been. You've seen that throughout history. But what we've seen in this country, it was a concerted effort since the 1970s to basically push these policies onto the Australian people and transform the Australian economy away from
because for most of the century before that, and even before that, was a generally accepted view, a common sense view that, private enterprise is great, go your hardest, but the government has responsibilities that it cannot absolve itself.
Yeah, even the Liberal Party, the party of the bankers, had people in it that were supporting, look, we need entrepreneurial enterprise, we need to support industry, we need to support manufacturers and stuff. I mean, that's a bit strange coming from the Liberal Party, right? Because they're a total free trade party.
But that's what they were in those days.
Yeah.
Whereas now, so it's flipped over a bit, so Labor now will speak in words against neoliberalism, But in fact, at the top, they still support privatisation and all these types of things, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's got to change. Anyway, so let's get on to the tax, the nuts and bolts of this tax discussion, though. The first point I want to make, Craig, is the whole issue is actually bogus. And the reason I say that is because around the world, countries are competing with each other to cut their tax rates. But what are we competing for? We're told, oh, you're competing for foreign investment. And it's just ridiculous. We've put out material that shows how Australia's economy performed best in both world wars when we were cut off from foreign investment.
Yeah.
We had a Commonwealth Bank in both world wars that generated the investment we needed sovereignly, domestically, right? We didn't need foreign investment, and that's when our economy performed the best. Go look it up, and you can call in and get our material from it.
Well, specifically, Robbie, we've just produced what we call our banking manual, which is a 100-page document that actually the first 2 articles in that go through this very, very specifically. That the Depression did not have to happen in this country. This was a political move, and then, as you saw, as you just mentioned, it was absolutely critical, is that when push come to shove, we had no foreign investment able to come in, the Commonwealth Bank, but the political forces behind Chifley and Curtin said we're going to take the Commonwealth Bank and use it as a vehicle to stabilise and to develop our country for war purposes at that time. You know, after the war, Chifley wanted to take it further, but of course he got smashed.
So that's one point about this foreign investment thing. You know, it's a joke, actually. The second point about it is that look at the way it's actually working in practice. We've got $2 trillion in super here, a huge chunk of which, Craig, gets invested overseas. Meanwhile, overseas pension funds, like in Canada and places, they come and invest their pension funds here, right? And all you're doing is just moving money around the world for the sake of, and we're told, oh, they're chasing the best tax rates. I mean, it's just rubbish. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is, I'll give you the example of Singapore and BHP. So for a long time, not just recently, a long time, BHP has been headquartered in Singapore, where they have a 17% corporate tax rate. And we've been told that Scott Morrison has cited Singapore and BHP as an example. Look, see, because Singapore's got 17%, that's why BHP's there and paying that tax instead of here. Oh, really? Well, if the government had any you-know-whats, right, they would say to BHP, you want to go pay Singapore's tax rate, you go mine Singapore's iron ore. Oh, there's no iron ore in Singapore? Then give us a break, right? You tell them, you're here, you're mining our iron ore, you're paying our tax rate. And this it's all a bluff. But the politicians, they're not stupid, they're corrupt, they're in on the bluff, right? They leave their jobs and they go and work for these big corporations, etc. So that's just to settle that part. And then the other thing about this ridiculous question, to dismiss it finally, is there's really good resources people can look at that shows the whole reason we have this issue of countries competing with each other over taxes, because after World War II, the British Empire saw it was losing its territorial power and decided to shore up its financial imperial power, and it turned its territories, especially in the Caribbean, into tax havens, and it did that to undermine nations. So that there was this, it had the same effect of the old pirates in the old days, Pirates of the Caribbean, where suddenly all the unscrupulous businesses in different countries would go and move their affairs to those tax havens, and then that became the excuse inside those countries, oh, see, we've got to compete with that, right? And Singapore actually had that as its origin as well. This has been revealed in a book called The Spider's Web. The book is called Treasure Islands by Nicholas Shaxson, which is really excellent to read. And then that has been made into a film called The Spider's Web, Britain's Second Empire, How Britain and its Dependent Territories Became the World's Largest Tax Haven. And they go through the details, and I really urge people to watch that just to see what we're dealing with, and don't let these politicians fool you, because the bottom line is, when you see it for what it is, instead of saying, oh, we've got to compete with that, no, all the countries of the world should band together and whack sanctions on the United Kingdom as a rogue state for setting this up until they stopped it.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Corbyn, Robbie's calling for the shutdown of tax havens because, internally and domestically inside the United Kingdom, you've got all this poverty, you've got collapse of infrastructure. He says, well, shut down the tax havens and bring that income back.
It's one of the reasons he's a genuine threat to the establishment.
Because he's tackling the City of London and the financial structures that are actually crippling the UK economy.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to turn this on its head and talk about how we need to change the structure, not the taxes.
Here are the current weather readings for Melbourne, Geelong and Shepparton on the MELfeed.video weather wall. It also includes tomorrow's forecast and expected minimum temperatures in these areas overnight. This is the MELfeed.video weather wall. We are currently looking for a sponsor. If you're interested, please email Michael at MELfeed.video for more details.
RSPCA, for all creatures, great and small.
If you choose to text while driving,
you could ruin lives.
Someone else's, your family's, or your own.
Choose not to instead.
The right choice could save someone's life.
Proud supporters of safety in our community.
GMCU and Southern Cross Austereo.
Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're talking about tax won't fix the economy. We need a new financial structure. And Craig, before the break, we were discussing how it's ridiculous the way all the countries of the world are forced to compete with each other on this race to the bottom of who can have the lowest tax rate, right? But we have this tax debate in Australia between the two major parties, and it's irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant to how to the problems we have that need to be solved in Australia. So let's look at that now. If I can sum up the biggest problem in the Australian economy, it's something that probably a lot of people haven't considered. It's we have become financialised. And from the 80s on, we were deindustrialised, right? Under all these neoliberal policies you rattled off before, free trade, globalisation, free markets, etc. Our productive industries were decimated, right? Shrank to become much smaller parts of our economy, and we became financialised. We now have the biggest financial sector in the world. Financial services is 9% of GDP. That's bigger than financial services is to the UK or to the US. And they're the ones that have got Wall Street and London in them, right? So this is big. That is made up, there's $2 trillion of super in that, right? There's $37 trillion of derivatives in that. There's all the banks lending to it. There's all the real estate speculation in that. When banks speculate on real estate, Craig, they're not looking at a house and saying, oh, we can lend money for this house and we'll make a little bit extra from the interest coming back, etc. No, there's all this financial dealings associated with that mortgage, right? Mortgage-backed securities and derivatives, and they can make stacks of money out of that. And meanwhile, some poor sucker has to buy that house and try and meet the debt payments on it, right? Service the debt payments on it. So this is this financialised economy, and it's money chasing money and chasing a return. That's what we've got in Australia.
Which will collapse.
It has to collapse.
This is just the same, it's like a Ponzi scheme. Actually, a giant economy-wide Ponzi scheme where nothing actually real is being created.
Exactly. Now, by contrast, let me say a few other things about the current structure of the economy. Construction is the second biggest sector after financial services. Now, while that looks physical and productive, it's distorted and it's so big because of the financial speculation in real estate. That's the only reason why, right? And a lot of that is setting us up for a huge property crash, as we've been long forecasting. And then you look at manufacturing and agriculture, which once upon a time, not that long ago, before the 80s, were the biggest sectors of our economy. Now they've shrunk right down. Australian manufacturing is 6% of the Australian economy, the lowest in the Western world, right? Now, so who's doing the work to pay the taxes, pay the interest on debts, etc., to keep this financial system propped up? That's the question you've got to ask yourself, right? We're really out of balance here. Now, I'll put a chart up on the screen. This comes from, we produced this flyer last year, Australia's sleepwalking to economic Armageddon, and that term comes from a former advisor to the Liberal Party, John Adams, right? And we borrowed some of his material for this flyer. And in this chart, you will see this credit to housing as a percent of GDP, right? Where it's gone from 20% of GDP was lent into housing in 1991. And that's now, as of 2015, that got to 90%, and that would be closing at probably around 100% now, right? And we've got 200% of household debt to income is the situation now, the highest household debt in the world as a result of that. But what's that money chasing? It's not chasing anything productive.
No, it's speculation, housing prices.
Exactly. And meanwhile, if you could put in a chart of bank lending to businesses, small and medium enterprises, the line goes the other way, right? Radically the other way. So those small and medium enterprises, they employ the people who have to earn the incomes to pay back the debt.
And this is the policy of the banks, Robbie, that are now under the microscope of the Royal Commission.
That's right.
And we're now witnessing the sort of corruption that this sort of policy brings.
Well, it's one of the reasons the problem is so big, because our financial sector is so big. Yeah. Right? Everyone is affected by it. No one escapes this.
And I think people are a bit shocked recently about these so-called enforceable undertakings. You know, a bank can make $100 million in income out of illegal activities, get slapped on the wrist for $3 million and get away with it.
Yep.
Well, I think we should have triple the amount that they make as the penalty, at least,
and
jail the people involved.
No, we should.
If they make $100 million from this sort of illegal activity, the fine's not $3 million, but $300 million.
But as we know, Craig, there's a blackmail element here, and it was made clear in America where this term emerged called too big to jail, right? Because APRA says our responsibility is to keep stability in the financial system, and if they took that kind of action, that could cause instability. Therefore, they've got us by the short and curlies, and we have to let them get away with it.
This is a political problem, Robbie, because look, the solution is very clear. It's not a mystery. First of all, we've got to go with Glass-Steagall banking separation. You've got to have a sound commercial banking system within your economy.
Now, what does that achieve, though, in relation to what we've just talked about?
Well, it means that you separate out, you get rid of this speculation. You can't have banks involved in literally printing money for the sake of propping up housing bubbles. See, in an economy, you've got certain classes of expenses. You've got legitimate necessary overhead, you've got speculative overhead or waste, and then you've got expenses that build the physical economy. That's where people go to work, right? That's your infrastructure, that's your manufacturing, that's your farming, right? That's where the money has to be not money, I should say.
That's where the wealth is produced.
That's where
you put the credit in there, wealth is produced from there that everyone benefits
from.
So
with the Glass-Steagall banking separation, Robbie, you separate out that speculative aspect of the banking, which has gone out of control, as we see with the Royal Commission, from the actual need for real regulated banking for the commercial sector.
And that leaves all that credit into the real economy.
Yeah, this is what Curtin Shifley did with the Commonwealth Bank in World War II, is that they used the Commonwealth Bank as the regulator that strictly enforced the idea that credit had to go into the productive economy. And that, in many cases, that was the building up of munitions for the war, but it was also for farming and to support the domestic economy when we were actually cut off from credit from around the world.
So Glass-Steagall, Craig, would have that effect of sort of stopping the rot and excising out the speculation. What else do we need to do structurally to make the economy actually move along?
We have to have a national bank, Robbie, an actual bank that creates the credit owned and run by the government for the purpose of directing large amounts of credit into the productive economy, and that means building large-scale infrastructure projects. Not this mentality where you just spend the money in the cities, right, but actually big projects like we've covered on the back of our Australian Alert Service this week, which is, where China is constructing an entire new city region south of Beijing to deal with the fact that Beijing's overpopulated. 22 million people live in Beijing at the moment. They're going to cap the population in Beijing. They've got all sorts of structural problems like pollution and overcrowding in Beijing, so they're going to build an entire new city south of Beijing, plan it out with a maximum of 5 million people in it. And they're going to connect these cities up with Beijing and the entire region through a network of high-speed rail.
I think there's Beijing, this new city, and then the Tianjin port city, and they're going to have a triangle of rail there.
Yeah, it's a planned approach. Now, Robbie, what if we were to have bipartisan support in this country for real economic development? It's going to take bipartisan or tripartisan or all the parties to actually commit to real economic development and not just idea of using infrastructure as a political ploy to get votes.
Do you have an example, Craig, of Dubbo, what Dubbo
Well,
could
look,
become?
Dubbo is, what, 800 kilometres, I think it's about 500, 600 kilometres from Melbourne and about 300 kilometres from Sydney. Hook Dubbo up to high-speed trains means that people can commute between Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, Sydney, and
We'll
Dubbo.
put on the screen Lance Endersby's proposal for an Australian ring railway, which would go through Dubbo up to Darwin.
And the idea is that then you could develop Dubbo as another major regional city. Bear in mind, Beijing is not on the coast.
No, it's
an inland, landlocked city. So you can actually have a plan of saying, okay, we are going to build new cities around this country. In fact, Gough Whitlam had that idea of building multiple new cities outside the major cities. So this idea of cramming everyone into the cities, the major capital cities, would be offset by the idea we're going to develop very good regional centres with the hospitals, the transportation, the water necessary to support it, decent planned housing, low cost affordable housing. The key here is the arteries of high-speed trains, Robbie.
And what that does is you're not just doing it for decentralisation for the hell of it. You have a high-speed rail through there, as Lance Endersby, the late Lance Endersby, emphasised. A high-speed rail going through the inland of Australia through Dubbo, not to go to Brisbane, you'll have trunk lines to Brisbane, to go to Darwin. You can have anything within Australia from the south, 24 hours from Darwin, and then another 24 hours from the biggest ports in Asia. You can then, that justifies developing along that railway the land where you can have high intensity horticultural industries, etc., high value crops that you can be exporting to Asia, right? All because a railway line, a high speed railway line has made it possible.
Well, that's the tyranny of distance, Robbie, is overcome, and that's the key here. And that's what the Chinese understand. They're doing it because they are solving a problem before their cities crash. Yep. Unlike most of the Western democracies today, New York City and so forth.
And with a national bank, we can
collapse.
This is not just a pie in the sky stuff. We can say, here's what we need to do. This will have this transformative effect. We can create the credit through our own bank to do it.
I think we're moving in that direction, Robbie, because look, the system is going to break down. We haven't solved the global financial crisis whatsoever. So our politicians, our elected leaders, are going to hear these ideas screamed more and more from the local populations.
So just on that, everything we've discussed in this segment is in our latest Australian Alert service. Call in and get a copy of it, including the article on how building infrastructure will easily support Australia's population growth. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about foreign interference.
Playing the 80s on Air FM 88.0.
Hi, this is Darren McAlane from Air FM Drive. Join me from 3 to 6 p.m. every afternoon on 88.0 in Penrith, and also you can catch me on tunein.com. That's from 3 to 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time.
Playing the 80s on Air FM 88.0.
I love the sound of rain on the roof. But I never thought they'd hear it like this.
You can give hope where it's needed most. Please donate to the Red Shield Appeal at salvos.org.au.
Every minute. Every hour.
Every mother and father.
Every sister and brother.
Every son and every daughter.
Everyone you see.
Everyone you cheer.
Everyone you watch.
And everyone you hear. Everyone you meet.
Everyone you know.
Everyone you love.
Everyone is affected.
Reach out and get connected.
Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, who is really interfering in our democracy? And a very significant event occurred last week, Craig, which I can't emphasise how significant it was, except it would have gone unnoticed by most people. And that was that ASIO, Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, which is our domestic spy agency, was moved by law from the Attorney General's Department to a new department called Home Affairs, right? And the Minister for Home Affairs is Peter Dutton. And what we have with Home Affairs, it's a super ministry that has all the law enforcement of Australia in the one ministry, and it very much is a super ministry fit for a police state. As it was happening, the same minister, Peter Dutton, mooted the idea that the Australian Signals Directorate should be given expanded powers to spy on Australians domestically, right? Now,
they've only got powers to spy on people outside the country.
That's right.
Legally.
They're there to look over things, etc. But they want to do that. Now, here's the main point I want to make, because we don't have a lot of time, and it's elaborated again in the alert service this week, right? There's an article that spells it out. This idea is not an Australian idea. When Peter Dutton has mooted this, the moving of ASIO to this department, this is not us doing something that we think is in our best interest. This is the apparatus called the Five Eyes directing us to step up our game or whatever to assist them. The Five Eyes is an intelligence sharing partnership between the UK, USA, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. It's not US-centric. It is UK-centric, right? 4 of those 5 countries have the Queen as head of state. All of those 5 countries had their intelligence agencies set up by British intelligence, right? Even the United States, right? Secretive intelligence agencies, by definition, are anti-democratic. They're outside of democracy, and they're very, very by virtue of that, they can be very, very powerful unless you have real oversight over them. But America didn't even think it needed them until World War II, right? And then the British persuaded them that they needed them. Now you've got things like this surveillance apparatus that was exposed by Edward Snowden, which is the National Security Agency, but it's more what they call GCHQ in the United Kingdom, right? Which has more invasive. It can do things the NSA is not allowed to do. Edward Snowden revealed, right? And there's massive global surveillance. And when we're doing this, it's because they're asking us to. Even the establishment of this department, Home Affairs, was set up when Turnbull went to the UK last July, met with the Prime Minister, Theresa May, and the Home Secretary there, Amber Rudd, and then he came back and announced, we're going to do what the UK's got. We're going to have a Home Affairs Department model in the Home Office, and in the Home Office, MI5 is based there, and that's why ASIO is going to be based in the Home Affairs Department in Australia. And this is not for terrorism. As we've said here a lot, look at MI5's history with relation to terrorism. They have colluded with terrorism, and the collusion has achieved 2 things. These terrorist attacks allow more powers for MI5, right? These extraordinary powers that we've become used to. And in the UK, they actually blatantly allowed terrorists to recruit people to go to places like Libya and Syria to fight for the regime change policy that Britain supported.
Yeah.
Right? So the whole thing's a scam. So what do you think?
I think, Robbie, people are going to look at this very seriously. The Five Eyes operation is not in our interests whatsoever. We talk about China spying on us, but the real threat is this.
Well, it's ASIO that tells us China's a threat, but ASIO is not speaking for us, it's speaking for this.
It's part of this Five Eyes.
Exactly. So keep an eye on this. We will, again, for more information, call in and get a copy of the Australian Alert Service. Thank you, Craig, for joining us.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks for tuning in, and tune in next week for more of the CEC Report.
Okay, Sarah, I'm going to order some pathology tests to see how everything's going.
Half the Australian population had a pathology test last year. That's you or someone you love. 100 tests are performed every minute, delivering vital medical information. From the moment you are born, your healthcare depends on pathology tests. 70% of medical decisions rely on information from pathology tests. Pathology is the engine room of healthcare. One small sample can reveal millions of insights all about you. Pathologists are your doctor's doctor. 25,000 people work to provide doctors with the answers they need to treat you. Australian pathology is world class. We may never meet you, but we see each of you as part of our family. Every minute, 23 Australians find out more about their health.
Good news, Sarah. The results show that everything's okay.
Pathology provides peace of mind.
I rely on Australian pathology.
Sign up online to support Australian pathology.
They say there's a chance I could die in a car crash, maybe even from heart disease, maybe even skin cancer.
I could die in a work-related accident, or I could die in a fight.
The fact is, the biggest cause of death for men in my age group is suicide.
Please don't let this happen to me.
You can do something. Lifeline believes that suicide is mostly preventable. Help us save lives. Find out what you can do at lifeline.org.au.
MELfeed Video is about to close operations for tonight, but we'll be back with you next Wednesday evening. In the meantime, here is a selection of programs that will be seen on our next scheduled web stream. You are welcome to visit our website at MELfeed.video for further details of this project. Until next time, from all of us at MELfeed Video, we wish you a very good night.